Uh, Hi, my name's Glenn Ford, and I'm here talking to Mike Hutchinson. We're both designers who work together on some projects, and we're just talking through a few of them in a couple of these videos. Today, I'm going to be talking to Mike about one of his upcoming projects, Perilous Tales, which I understand he's going to be putting together and coming out from Planet Smasher Studios sometime next year. I guess the obvious first question is, Mike, what is Perilous Tales?
Thanks, Glenn. Perilous Tales was it is a miniature skirmish game that, like most of the games that I tend to write, is very agnostic to your miniatures collection. It doesn't have a specific line of miniatures, and Perilous Tales really was a result of buying quite heavily into the Cthulhu Wars Kickstarter game, and then not having anybody to play that board game with, and having all of these lovely Cthulhuid monsters. And all of these fantastic investigators and pulp heroes and so on that I've collected over the years. So I sat there with this pile of really cool looking minis going, I wonder what I could do with these. And was actually just very keen to push them around on the table myself. So I wrote Perilous Tales initially as an excuse to push pulp miniatures around and shoot deep ones and other Lovecraftian beasties for myself. And yeah, that was the genesis of it. And at the current state, it reached quite a nice first version, and then Glenn, you helped push it over the edge with a nice AI iteration on the AI system. And then during lockdown, hello COVID-19, sort of solo games became a bit of a thing again in a big way. So I just sent a tweet out saying, oh, by the way, I've got this thing I've published on my website a year or two ago, which is a nice way of playing solo adventure games with your ramshackle miniature collections. And Ash Barker from Guerrilla Miniature Games picked it up and sent it skywards onto his social feeds, and also made a lovely initial Let's Play video about it. And so people really got kind of interested in it, and it seemed to catch people's imaginations. So I thought, free play testing. Let's get a group together on Facebook, spin out a bit more of a tidied up, clarified rulebook, and we've been iterating it from there. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. It feels like there's a game here. It's gonna, yeah, so we're gonna do something with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I remember the very early sort of alpha test version where I think I sat down over a week and played through all the scenarios, and I think at that point, literally, I was the only person who'd ever played, because I gave back feedback, and you're like, yeah, I haven't played through all of them at this point.
Classic.
So I mean, obviously, at the moment with COVID and lockdown, I don't know how this is going to be sort of on YouTube, whatever, forever. So people might end up looking at it in years to come. But we're recording this in the middle of the 2020 sort of pandemic lockdown. Solo gaming has obviously become a much bigger thing. However, I know that you, with, I guess, family commitments, work commitments, 101 things that seem to, combine to keep you away from clubs. Are those parts of the concerns are why you started developing a solo-led, particularly a solo-led skirmish game system?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely haven't had as much time to game as I'd like to since I think, probably before kids came along, but certainly after my girls were born. And being able to set up a solo board game of something and play that through and enjoy the tactical challenge and let the theme come out is a lovely thing. But I'm at heart a model maker and a miniatures painter and a wargamer, so I just wanted to capture that same feeling of kind of unfolding a little tabletop sort of story, have an excuse to paint a few squads of dudes or some new monsters. And so I guess I've not gone crazy on writing solo miniatures games, because there are some things that it seems to work really nicely for, and some things that, trying to I know there is a fine tradition of trying to replicate kind of big mass battle stuff in a solitaire way. I haven't gone there yet, but yeah, like telling a sort of cinematic 5 heroes against the dark kind of a narrative seems to just work really nicely anyway in any format. And I have lots of miniatures and like pushing them around tables, even if it's just me sort of taking back moves and pretending whether I've measured it correctly and not really worrying about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's quite interesting about Perilous Tales is that because it's so it's a sort of 1950s maybe, but just general pulp adventure horror sort of settings. It's a very clear sort of these are definitely the good guys and these are definitely the bad guys, and you've got a sort of definite story of you're definitely going through this storyline. You're encountering the bad guys. You're definitely the heroes. I think it makes it look. Because if you, I think if you set up some of those stories and you said, okay, someone's got to take the bad guy's side, you'd always have that thing of, okay, who's going to have to be, you know, the deep ones today? Who's going to have to be Dracula? Who's going to have to be the Wolfman?
Yeah, so we should say, I guess, that the way that the game plays out is that you set up a scenario. All of the bad guys that are controlled by the game are set up as kind of blip counters. They're these little threat markers that you don't know exactly where the bad guys are going to pop out and in what sequence and in what position. And so you as the player, as the protagonist, are a clump of 5 heroes. One's a sort of shiny leader character with a bit more skills and bravado, and the others are your cast of side characters, and you are essentially trying to beat the bad guy, complete the objectives before the threat counter, which is kind of the pressure, not quite a turn counter, but the sort of pressure marker hits 10.
Yeah, I mean, because there's already been a fantastic community response, so which you always seem to sort of hook into with, you know, Gaslands has had a great community response, and again, Perilous Tales. I think you said yourself that part of the reason that we're hopefully going ahead to make Perilous Tales into something is because the community picked it up. I think if there hadn't been that response from other people when you sort of put it up, I don't think we'd necessarily be carrying through to try and make it into something.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, it's partly the fact that solo gaming is kind of a thing right now, but I mean, what's nice about having a process where you write something, you get inspired by an idea or a mechanic, and then you write something reasonably lightweight and you just spin it out there, and don't be too precious about the fact that this is one of your ideas, my precious. I just spun it out, and it's been on the website for a couple of years now, in a perfectly playable PDF format. And so it's nice to have a sort of stable of those things and sort of shoot them up into space and see if anybody takes a second look. And if, you know, if somebody does take a second look, then there might be something there. And in this case, obviously it got a lot more oxygen thanks to Ash on GMG. But once the Facebook group was there, like, it grew quickly, and people, I think people were just inspired by the fact that the system is very tidy in terms of you just need 5 characters and roughly about the same number of monsters. And because it's a kind of monster of the week sort of X-Files type format, you can paint up some monsters that you've had lying around, have a really satisfying game with them, and then have an excuse to paint on the next set of monsters. But you've only got, you know, 4 or 5 models to paint up for the second game because you've already got your team of heroes painted up. And I think that hobby challenge, tying into that hobby challenge, is like, that's what makes it a miniatures game for me. If it doesn't have a thing where you're like, oh, I need to physically kind of model that out and have some kind of element of model making in it, then for me it's not really interesting as a miniatures game.
I think one of the things, personally, one of the things I really like about it is that it gives an extra life to those minis that you've maybe got on the shelf somewhere, you don't know quite what to do with them. Maybe you pick them up just because you thought they looked cool, and they've never really found a home. I mean, you know, you can be playing in a Victorian mansion with it. You can be playing, you know, a range of places where certain minis wouldn't fit into any other system can suddenly have their home in Perilous Tales, which I think is one of the things.
And also, I think one of the things that I probably haven't figured out how to make the best use of yet is that it's actually quite good for making a second use of miniature-heavy board games. So if you have Mansions of Madness, that's a fantastic stock of miniatures to play Perilous Tales with. If you've got Deep Madness, that's a fantastic stock of miniatures to play. Like anything that's got a kind of, you know, sort of aliens, marines kind of a cast list, or anything that's got a kind of pulpy cast list. What else have I got? Last Night on Earth, that'd be a fantastic box of toys you could just play. You could play Perilous Tales with. So I think there's also something about the fact that it's not an overly complicated system in terms of a skirmish war game, and that's partly because it's written as a solo game for me, and I want mostly to not have to be thinking about things. That's why the game doesn't really have any plus or minus modifiers on any of the dice numbers, because I can't really. I find doing basic addition and subtraction somewhat stressful in the heat of the moment. I'd rather just have an evening's entertainment where I don't have to do basic math. So yeah, there are some things about the rules that are deliberately simplified so that the story can come through, but the decisions that you're making are about, you know, exactly how daring you're going to be, and how you know, are you going to dash into the monsters, or are you going to, you know, worry about whether that field full of corn has got something terrifying in it or whatnot?
Yeah, I think I think the game engine does. I think one of the things that's nice about it is it does a certain amount sort of under the hood. That there's a level where it's quite simple to approach. I mean, already the community have started picking up on some of the things, like the way that the blip counters create the sort of fog of war. So you've got a table, and you know that there's something out there that's going to react to your approach, and it's going to be something that you're going to have to trigger at some point. And walking into the haunted mansion, or the sinister cornfield, or the spooky forest, and the game sort of runs a lot of that for you. The AI is, I think it's to the point where it's quite simple, but it feels intelligent and it feels effective. You understand what's motivating the villains at various points. They have sort of different behaviors. One thing I think that's already coming through from the community is how sort of I'll use say tinkerable the system is. There's already people on Board Game Geek who are using it to play sci-fi battles, creating sort of 70s supervillains for their little Bond-style heroes to fight them off. I know that's something you've always wanted to have, a sort of a tool set to allow people to somewhere crack in and build their own villains and build their own heroes to some degree. Is that something you want to sort of?
Yeah, it's interesting that actually, because like it's somewhat true of Gaslands as well. Like both Gaslands and Perilous Tales are kind of rules engines that provide a certain feeling of a game, but they, because of the feeling is so strong, oddly the theme is somewhat not amorphous, but like it's quite modifiable, and you can make anything that feels like a Perilous Tales, sort of like there's an unknown enemy and it's creeping towards you and you're helpless and you're trapped in the dark and you might be able to blast your way out, but you might get consumed. Like it's really fun to try and create an engine that doesn't serve a particular theme necessarily, like a board game theme sort of necessarily has to click in with its mechanics. I think what's interesting about building miniature war games, particularly because they're so analog and there's so much spectrum for kind of movement and interaction, I really like trying to find these feelings where it's like Gaslands is trying to give you the feeling of heavy inertial collisions, but they're ludicrous and it's very science fiction-y, and so it's things that are overblown and explodey, but they've all got like real forward momentum. And in Perilous Tales, like I've said, it's about that spookiness in the dark, and you know, something goes bang and you don't know whether it's a monster or just a cat falling off of a tin roof or whatever. And so that engine seems to be that once you've understood the way that you lay out the threat tokens and the way that your miniatures can kind of sneak up the board and maybe loose all hell, or maybe just discover something kind of dark and sinister, and that the objective system is really like clicked into not just killing everything, but like you've got to throw the switches, or you've got to find the pages and burn them. I think that feeling is really transferable, because that's a whole genre in cinema, and you can lay that in different periods, and you can lay that with different kind of protagonists and monsters and stuff. So yeah, I'm really quite satisfied with how well that has been adopted by the tinkering community, and who've immediately thrown a bunch of new monsters and new kind of objectives and scenarios out there. So I think with the, like, as we get further towards putting this into a lovely sort of physical product that we put out, like finding more ways to give people both inspiration of like what else there is that you can do once you string these things together, or when you build more heavily, or where you tinker around some of the things that we haven't allowed to be tinkered with yet. And then, yeah, and maybe as, like you say, almost like as simple as sort of giving people permission to do that, like introducing the idea that that's totally acceptable, and here's where you can find a community of people doing more of that.
Yeah, so it seems that you've been inspired by a lot of the sort of Hammer horror and Universal Studios horror movies. Somewhere between Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, Dracula is definitely a sort of central figure in Perilous Tales. Are there a particular set of movies, particular set of genres that inspired you in writing Perilous Tales?
Definitely the Hammer horrors. Like the music of the Hammer horror movies is always playing when I'm gaming on Perilous Tales on my table, but also like ropey 50s stuff as well. Like it's weird because people read the kind of the Thing John Carpenter monster and assumed more naturally that it was John Carpenter's Thing, whereas actually more hardwired into my brain for some reason, I must have watched it when I was a kid, is the 50s Blob movie, which I absolutely adored. And yeah, and the you know, lots of black and white stuff like The Invasion of the Body Snatchers and It Conquered the World and other things like that. So there's definitely a kind of cheesy 50s vibe, which I dig, and then a cheesy sort of slightly saucy 70s vibe, which I dig. And then there's like the 80s, you know, the 80s trashy kind of horror, like low budget stuff, which clearly if you've been anywhere near Gaslands, you'll know I dig an Arnie movie from the 80s, no questions asked. So it's just, I think it's, and then like I was obsessed with the X-Files, and so that kind of monster of the week thing, and whenever they remade a Twilight Zone, was it? I just, yeah, like I think it's
Outer Limits.
Oh, Outer Limits, that was what I meant. Yeah, no, that was exactly what I meant. Yeah, so I think it's a pretty, like, my taste for bad horror is a very broad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've visited your home, and there are some movie posters knocking about from some fairly random sort of horror films going about there.
Yeah, there's also a Godzilla poster. I haven't done a Godzilla game yet, but
yes,
about 6 or 7 versions exist in my Wingman notebooks that I use for games design. We'll get there.
Yes, soon. Yeah. I think that's that's very much a yet with a triple underline in it. If you get your way in life, I think. Okay, so I suppose the last thing to ask is what is the intention with Perilous Tales? Where are we going?
Perilous Tales?
Where are we going with it? What do you want to see happen? What are we going to try and do?
So Perilous Tales shall have a lovely hardback physical edition. And Glenn, with all of your knowledge of all the options that exist for board game manufacturing, you've been coming up with some fantastic ideas about how to put together a lovely deluxe version, which has a box that contains the bits and bobs that you need. Because there are a few bits and bobs that you need. They're mostly scavengeable because they're 30mm circular tokens and whatnot. But it's a game that is reasonably simple to pick up, and if you don't have all the bits and bobs, but you did have a box full of cool minis from another miniature heavy board game, then what we're planning to do is put out a deluxe edition that's got enough, it's got everything that you need to play the game in it. And then the rulebook itself, as we've been saying, the system is quite simple, but the breadth of it comes from the number of monsters and the number of encounters and the sort of stories that you can tell. So got tons of plans for making a very sort of beautifully laid out and very rich and very deep set of gribblies for you to tussle with, and stories that will unfold over multiple episodes, because that's something that I've tried on lots of different precursors of this game, and I'm very excited to get right. So yeah, hopefully as early as the first half of next year, we'll be putting out the details about how this physical edition of Perilous Tales is going to reach people's doorsteps. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. We're going to make it very, very dripping in theme and very, very expandable and expansive, and should have tons of game content in it for a reasonable price tag.
Okay, fantastic. Is there somewhere online where people can turn up, follow along, download the early version of the rules?
If you want to know more about Perilous Tales, you can go to periloustales.com, and all the information that you need is there, including how to jump in and get the beta rulebook, because we are in active open play testing at the moment, in amongst all the other many projects I'm working on. And you can also get involved with the Facebook group, which is really busy with people making cool minis to play the game and sharing their battle reports, because it's a very describable game. And there's been a couple of fantastic creators on YouTube who've started publishing some regular reports of them gaming through some of the scenarios, and it's not only fabulous to watch and fun to see, but it's also an incredible resource when you're a games designer and people are prepared to slog through your half-finished rules and video themselves making their best fist at it. And of course, you know where the inverted quotes mistakes are, which is of course not a mistake that they're making, but a mistake where you have failed to communicate something. It's just tremendously valuable, and yeah, I can't believe that's a resource that you're allowed to get for free. So thank you to everyone.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we constantly thanking the community through, from Gasland to Perilous Tales. We've been very lucky with how people have picked those things up, followed it along, supported it, and gone to work on it. Okay, well, I'll say thanks for talking to me about Perilous Tales today, Mike. And hopefully we'll get together very shortly and talk about something else that we're working on, and put that video up soon.
Sounds perfect. Thanks for welcoming me into your virtual living room. We'll do it again soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.